What's the first thing that comes to mind when I say diesel engine reliability? Toyota? Cummins? How about a Ford engine that could outlast the truck it came in? Never heard of it? What if I told you that in 1994, Ford and a tiny diesel company nobody had heard of created an engine so bulletproof that it single-handedly saved Ford's truck division from complete humiliation? An engine so overbuilt that mechanics joke it'll run forever, minus one day. An engine that turned Ford from the laughingstock of the diesel world into a legitimate competitor overnight. The 7.3 Power Stroke. 7.3 liters of pure mechanical simplicity that somehow managed to be both revolutionary and deliberately primitive at the same time. And the craziest part? It was never supposed to exist. You're probably thinking I'm exaggerating. I mean, come on, one engine saving an entire truck line? But here's the thing. Ford was in serious trouble in the early 90s. Their partnership with International Harvester for the 6.9 and 7.3 IDI diesels was producing engines that were, well, let's just say they weren't winning any awards. Reliable? Sure. Powerful? Not even close. We're talking 185 horsepower on a good day. Meanwhile, Dodge had just dropped the Cummins 5.9 bomb on the market, cranking out 400 pound-feet of torque, while Ford customers were stuck with engines that struggled to pull a horse trailer up a mild incline. The situation was actually worse than most people realize. Ford's market share in the diesel pickup segment had dropped to embarrassing levels by 1993. Chevy was eating their lunch with the 6.5 Detroit, which wasn't even that good, and Dodge was absolutely destroying everyone with that inline-six Cummins. Ford dealers were literally begging customers not to buy diesels. Think about that for a second. Dealers actively steering customers away from higher-margin diesel trucks because the engines were that underwhelming. So Ford did what any desperate company would do. They panicked. But instead of rushing something half-baked to market, they made a decision that would change everything. They went to Navistar, formerly International Harvester, and basically said, "Build us something that won't embarrass us anymore." What Navistar came back with was originally called the T444E. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, does it? That's probably why Ford's marketing department renamed it the Power Stroke, which, let's be honest, sounds way cooler. Now here's where things get interesting. The T444E wasn't actually designed for pickups. Nope. This thing was originally intended for medium-duty trucks and school buses. You know, vehicles that need to run for 500,000 miles without major issues. Navistar basically took their commercial engine philosophy and crammed it into something small enough to fit under the hood of an F-250. The result was an engine that was hilariously overbuilt for pickup truck duty. Let me paint you a picture of what made this thing so special. First off, the block. Cast iron so thick you could probably use it as a boat anchor. Seriously, the thing weighs over 900 pounds stripped. Just the block. The cylinder walls were thick enough that guys are still boring these things out 30 years later. The crankshaft? Forged steel with journals the size of soda cans, main-bearing caps that looked like they belonged in a semi-truck. Everything about this engine screamed, "I refuse to die." But the real magic was in the fuel system. This was Ford's first foray into direct injection, and they went with a hydraulically actuated, electronically controlled unit injection system. HEUI for short. Sounds complicated, right? It was, but it was also brilliant. Instead of a traditional injection pump that could fail and leave you stranded, each injector had its own little hydraulic pump powered by engine oil pressure. If one failed, you still had 7 more. The redundancy was insane. Of course, Navistar being Navistar, they couldn't help but make things interesting. The HEUI system used engine oil pressurized to 3,000 psi to fire the injectors. 3,000 pounds per square inch of hot engine oil screaming through tiny passages. What could possibly go wrong? As it turned out, quite a bit if you didn't maintain it properly. But that's the thing. If you just changed your oil on time and didn't run garbage $15 oil filters, the system was practically bulletproof. The introduction happened in mid-1994 for the 1994.5 model year, because apparently Ford couldn't wait for 1995. They needed this thing yesterday. The first Power Strokes rolled off the line producing 210 horsepower and 425 pound-feet of torque. Doesn't sound like much by today's standards, but compared to the wheezing IDI engines they replaced, it was like going from a moped to a motorcycle. Ford's marketing department went absolutely bonkers. They had TV commercials showing Power Stroke trucks pulling massive loads up mountains. Magazine ads claiming best-in-class everything. They even sponsored a bunch of truck pulls and tractor pulls to show off the torque. It was obnoxious. It was over the top. It worked perfectly. But here's what the marketing didn't tell you. The early trucks had some teething issues. The exhaust back pressure valves would stick, causing no start conditions. The glow plug relays would fry themselves. The camshaft position sensors would randomly decide to take a vacation. Oh, and my personal favorite, the fuel bowl heaters would occasionally melt their own housings. Ford was scrambling to fix these issues while simultaneously trying to build engines fast enough to meet demand. Because despite the problems, people couldn't get enough of these trucks. Dealers were selling them before they even hit the lots. Some places had waiting lists 6 months long. It was absolute insanity. Ford went from begging people to consider gas engines to having customers literally fighting over diesel. Allocations. The real genius of the 7.3 wasn't its power output, though. It was the simplicity hiding beneath all that technology. No variable geometry turbo to fail, no emissions equipment to clog up, no complicated injection timing to go haywire. Just a massive iron block, a simple turbo, and that HEUI system doing its thing. It was the last of the purely mechanical diesels dressed up with just enough electronics to be modern. By 1996, Ford had worked out most of the bugs. The engine was now making 215 horsepower and 450 pound-feet, and more importantly, it was doing it reliably. Stories started circulating about these engines going 300,000, 400,000, even 500,000 miles without rebuilds. Delivery companies were reporting million-mile engines still running strong. The legend was beginning to build. Then came 1999, and Ford decided to really let the 7.3 off its leash. They upgraded the turbocharger, tweaked the programming, and strengthened some internals. The result? 250 horsepower and 525 pound-feet of torque. But here's the kicker. They actually detuned it from what it was capable of. Testing showed the engine could reliably produce over 300 horsepower, but Ford deliberately held it back. Why? Because they wanted it to last forever. This is where the story gets really interesting. While Ford was building its reputation on reliability, the aftermarket was discovering just how much power was locked inside these engines. Turns out, with just a computer tune, you could add 100 horsepower. Throw in some bigger injectors and a better turbo. 400 horsepower was easily achievable. Want to go completely insane? Built engines were pushing 600, 700, even 800 horsepower. From an engine designed for school buses. The tuning scene around the 7.3 was absolutely wild. You had guys like Bill Hewitt and Jody Tipton figuring out how to hack the PCM before anyone really understood what a PCM was. Companies like DP Tuner and Tony Wildman were writing custom tunes on DOS-based programs that looked like they belonged in 1985. It was the digital Wild West, and everyone was trying to be the fastest gun in town. But perhaps unsurprisingly, when you take an engine designed for 250 horsepower and push it to 500, things start breaking. Connecting rods would literally launch themselves through blocks. Head gaskets would give up in spectacular fashion. Transmissions would grenade themselves trying to handle the torque. The 4R100 automatic became known as the 4R done for good. Ford never intended for people to hot rod these things. And it showed. Yet somehow, this just added to the legend. Forums were full of stories about guys fixing their blown engines in parking lots with basic hand tools. The simplicity that made it reliable also made it fixable. No special diagnostic equipment needed, no proprietary tools required, just mechanical knowledge and determination. Try doing that with a modern diesel. The golden years of the 7.3 were 1999 to 2003. These are the ones everyone wants today. Ford had perfected the formula. The forged connecting rods could handle serious power. The programming was refined. Even the interior finally didn't feel like a penalty box. These trucks were printing money for Ford. Profit margins were through the roof. Dealers couldn't keep them in stock. Life was good. But storm clouds were gathering. The EPA had been watching the diesel market with increasing interest, and they didn't like what they saw. These engines were dirty, like really dirty. A single 7.3 Power Stroke produced more particulates than a dozen modern cars. The writing was on the wall. New emissions regulations were coming, and they were going to change everything. Ford knew the 7.3 couldn't meet the upcoming 2004 emission standards without massive changes that would compromise its reliability. So they made a decision that still has Ford truck enthusiasts arguing today. They killed it. The last 7.3 Power Stroke rolled off the assembly line in mid-2003. After less than a decade of production, the engine that saved Ford's diesel program was gone. Its replacement was the 6.0 Power Stroke, and well, let's just say that didn't go quite as smoothly. The 6.0 was everything the 7.3 wasn't: complex, temperamental, and expensive to fix. Head gaskets failed, EGR coolers exploded, oil coolers clogged, high-pressure oil pumps died, injectors stuck. It was a disaster of such epic proportions that Ford sued Navistar for billions of dollars. Yeah, billions with a B. Meanwhile, 7.3 values started climbing. These trucks that sold for 40 grand new were still worth 25 grand with 200,000 miles on them. Today, a clean, low-mile 2003 crew cab can sell for more than it cost new. It's absolute insanity, but it makes sense when you consider what came after. The 6.0 was replaced by the 6.4, which had its own problems. Twin turbos that liked to fail. Diesel particulate filters that would clog up. Fuel dilution issues that would destroy engines. Then came the 6.7 Scorpion, which Ford finally built themselves, and while it's actually pretty good, it's complicated as hell. Dozens of sensors, emissions equipment everywhere, $10,000 repair bills. It's everything the 7.3 wasn't. This is probably why the 7.3 has achieved almost mythical status in the truck world. It represents the last of an era, the last simple diesel, the last engine you could actually work on yourself, the last time reliability mattered more than emissions numbers or fuel economy figures. It's mechanical nostalgia at its finest. But was it really as good as everyone remembers? Well, yes and no. Let's be honest here. Stock. These engines were slow. 0 to 60 in about 15 seconds if you were lucky. They were loud. Like Wake Up the Neighborhood loud. Cold starts sounded like someone throwing hammers in a clothes dryer. They got terrible fuel economy by modern standards. Maybe 15 mpg highway if you drove like a grandmother. And the ride? Quality? Let's just say your kidneys would know about every pothole. The thing is, none of that mattered. Because when you needed to tow 15,000 pounds across the country, the 7.3 would do it without complaint. When you needed to idle for 8 hours straight in the middle of winter, it would sit there purring like a very loud, very smoky cat. When everything else on the truck fell apart, which it would because it was a 90s Ford product after all, that engine would keep running. I've talked to countless 7.3 owners over the years, and they all say the same thing. It's not about the power, it's not about the refinement, it's about trust. They trust these engines in a way you just don't see with modern stuff. There's something deeply satisfying about knowing your engine will outlast you. It's why guys rebuild these trucks over and over. New transmission, new front end, new interior, but always the same engine. Because why would you change what works? The influence of the 7.3 extends way beyond just Ford trucks, too. It basically created the modern diesel performance industry. Before the Power Stroke, nobody was really hot-rodding diesels. Sure, you had some Cummins guys doing crazy stuff, but it was niche. The 7.3 brought diesel performance mainstream. Suddenly, everyone wanted a tuned diesel truck. Banks, Bully Dog, Edge, SCT, all these companies exploded because of the 7.3. It also changed how manufacturers approached diesel engines. Before the 7.3, diesel pickups were basically work trucks with nice seats. After, they became luxury vehicles that happened to tow. The success of the Power Stroke forced GM and Dodge to up their games. The Duramax and the Common Rail Cummins both exist because Ford proved there was massive demand for powerful, refined diesel pickups. But perhaps the biggest impact was on Ford itself. The 7.3 didn't just save their diesel program, it transformed their entire truck division. The Super Duty line, which launched alongside the 7.3, became Ford's most profitable vehicle line. We're talking billions in profit from trucks that were basically held together by that engine's reputation. Even today, decades later, Ford still trades on the goodwill generated by the 7.3. There's actually a funny story about how desperate Ford was to recapture that magic. In 2020, they introduced a new gas engine and called it, wait for it, the 7.3. But it's a gasoline V8. Has absolutely nothing to do with the Power Stroke except displacement. It's like naming your kid Michael Jordan and hoping he'll be good at basketball. The forums went absolutely nuclear when Ford announced it. How dare they use that sacred number? But honestly, the new 7.3 gas engine is actually pretty solid. It's just not, the 7.3. So where does that leave us today? In a weird place, honestly. The surviving 7.3 Power Strokes are either beaten-to-death work trucks with 500,000 miles or pristine garage queens that never see dirt. There's very little middle ground. The nice ones are becoming collectible, which is bizarre for what was essentially a farm truck engine. But that's what happens when you build something people actually love instead of just tolerate. The aftermarket support is still insane too. You can still buy literally every part for these engines brand new. Want a complete rotating assembly? No problem. Fresh HEUI injectors? Got dozens of options. Performance parts? The catalog is thicker than a phone book. Remember phone books? The 7.3 does. It's that old. There's even companies doing complete restorations now, taking rusty farm trucks and turning them into better-than-new showpieces. We're talking frame-off restorations of F-350 dualies, $50,000 rebuilds of trucks that sold for $35,000 new. It's completely irrational. But when has love ever been rational? The really fascinating thing is how the 7.3 has become this benchmark that every diesel gets compared to. Yeah, but will it last like a 7.3? Has become the ultimate question in diesel forums. Never mind that modern diesels make twice the power with better fuel economy and lower emissions. People want that million-mile reliability, even if they'll never drive more than 100,000 miles. It's created this weird situation where Ford can't win. If they build something reliable but simple, people complain it's not powerful enough. If they build something powerful and complex, people complain it's not reliable enough. Everyone wants a modern 7.3, but that's impossible. You can't build a simple engine that meets modern emission standards. The regulations literally won't allow it. This is maybe the real tragedy of the 7.3 story. It wasn't killed by competition or market forces or even corporate greed. It was regulated out of existence. The very simplicity that made it great became illegal. You couldn't build a 7.3 today if you wanted to. The EPA would laugh you out of the building. But here's the thing that nobody talks about. The 7.3 had to die for diesel technology to advance. If engines like the 7.3 had been allowed to continue, we'd never have gotten common rail injection, variable geometry turbos, or any of the technology that makes modern diesels so incredible. The Cummins in a new Ram makes 1,000 pound-feet of torque while getting 30 mpg. That's insane. The 7.3 could never do that. Still, there's something lost in all that progress. The connection between driver and machine, the mechanical sympathy required to really understand your engine, the satisfaction of fixing something yourself. Modern diesels are appliances, incredibly capable appliances, but appliances nonetheless. The 7.3 was a partner. I think that's why prices keep climbing for these old trucks. It's not really about the engine, though, that's part of it. It's about what the engine represents. The last time things were simple, the last time you could understand what you owned. The last time a truck was just a truck, not a rolling computer with a bed. Will we ever see anything like the 7.3 again? Honestly, no. The world has moved on. Emission standards, safety requirements, customer expectations, they've all changed too much. The best we can hope for is that manufacturers remember the lessons the 7.3 taught. Build it strong. Keep it simple where you can. Think about the second and third owners, not just the first. But even if we never see another engine like it, the 7.3 Power Stroke's legacy is secure. It saved Ford's diesel program. It created an entire industry. It proved that Americans would pay premium prices for diesel pickups. It showed that reliability could be a selling point, not just power or features. Most importantly, it gave hundreds of thousands of people a truck they could depend on. There's an old saying in the diesel world, "Chrome won't get you home." It's a reminder that all the shiny parts and big power numbers don't mean anything if your engine leaves you stranded. The 7.3 understood this. It wasn't the prettiest, wasn't the most powerful, definitely wasn't the quietest. But it would get you home. Every single time. Maybe that's why guys still daily drive these things. Why they'll spend 10 grand rebuilding a 20-year-old truck instead of buying something newer. Why forums are still active discussing engines that haven't been built in 2 decades. The 7.3 earned something most engines never achieve: trust. Complete, unwavering trust. So next time you see some beat-up Super Duty rumbling down the highway, leaving a trail of black smoke and noise in its wake, don't just see an old truck, see a survivor, see a legend, see the engine that saved Ford and changed the truck world forever. The 7.3 Power Stroke, the million-mile engine, the last of its kind. And honestly, that's probably the perfect ending for this story. Not with a bang, not with a whimper, but with thousands of these engines still out there, still working, still refusing to die. Long after Ford moved on, long after the EPA changed the rules, long after everyone said they were obsolete, they're still running, still towing, still proving that sometimes, just sometimes, simpler really is better. The 7.3 didn't just save Ford's truck division, it reminded an entire industry what actually matters. Not the latest technology, not the biggest numbers, not the flashiest features, just the simple question of whether it'll start tomorrow morning. And for the 7.3 Power Stroke, the answer was always yes.